Well, let's begin with a show of hands today. How many of you have ever read a news article or subscribed to a news article or a publication or purchased something online? Anybody ever done that? You ever done that? I think I get all my news anymore. They're like 3 or 4 journals or articles or publications. I read them all on my iPad or go through them each and every day. And of course, it's really quite easy. I mean, it's not as hard. You know, you read the first thing and then they catch you because it says, read more. And if you click on that, they're going to take you to an area where they're going to get your data, right? Your name, your address, and your email address, right? And then there's one more step at the very bottom after they've gotten all that information that they want. It says, check here, terms of agreement. Terms of service, right? Check here. And if you check that box and you click, then the whole world of information opens up to you through that website. Okay? Well, that little box that says terms of service is where I want to take you, because that's the phrase, that's the word that catches my attention. Because, you know, when you think about it, the terms of service they're talking about are really not terms of serving you in any way, shape, or form. Rather, I mean, has anybody here ever read that stuff? Or did you just do what I do, click it so you can read? Yeah, you click it. If you read it, you're going to drown in legalese, where it is an extensive list of how they are not really accountable to you or responsible to you, and all the things that do not apply to you and they won't do for you, and what actions you can't take against them. You see, it really isn't terms of service. When you check that box, what you're agreeing to are terms of disservice. Because it's really not about you at all. It's about them. And I find it interesting because it seems to me that it's reflective in many ways of how we have discombobulated, flipped around, misinterpreted, interpreted to our own benefit what the word service is about. You know? What the word service is about and how we qualify it. Think about this. When you hear the title Internal Revenue Service, are you thinking that they're really there to help you? When you go to have your driver's license replaced and you draw a number, and you go to the little booth where the person looks at you with a frown because you are an interruption to their day, do you associate that with the Division of Motor Vehicle Service? No. Or if you call customer service, 1-800-customer service, and you get this recording that says, thank you for calling such and such. Your call is important to us. The next operator will be with you in approximately 1,900 minutes. True? You see, the terms of service, as they are applied and utilized in our day and age, really don't have much to do with customer service. At least I don't see it that way. They have to do with how you might serve the company, the bottom line, the profit center that you are purchasing something from. Which may be why our world has such difficulty with this Jesus talk, because the definition of service that Jesus has, where Jesus ties service or helping others to sacrifice and grace, we have divorced those. And they don't make sense. They aren't associated anymore. It's really a contractual agreement rather than a sacrificial one. You see, for Jesus, service was never associated with the bottom line. In fact, if our businesses were based on his application, the stockholders would probably be running for the hills. Why? Because Jesus' definition of service was one that was extravagant, almost ridiculous by today's standards. You have 100 sheep, you lose one. tax write-off. Let it go, right? But Jesus doesn't do that, does he? He leaves the 99 to go out. He says the one, the redemption and the finding of the one causes the angels to rejoice. On his last night, and many of you have going away parties, farewell gatherings for one another, and when you're the person departing, you know, it's nice to have people kind of fawn over you and say, we'll miss you, right? I mean, that's kind of nice. And Jesus doesn't do that. On his last night with his disciples, he's not about himself at all. Rather, he takes out a towel and gets on his knees and he washes his disciples' feet. You see, the terms of service that Jesus taught and practiced really contained only one term, which amounted to full service, but it was really only about one term, not paragraph after paragraph of legalese. His terms of service were about love. That was all he asked his followers to do. Love. Love one another. Not just because you can do something for me, not just simply because I like you, but because that is what I am called to do. This was an observation of Tertullian. I'm sure you all have read the writings of Tertullian, right? One of the church fathers, one of the patriarchs of the early church, latter part of the first century, in his observations of Christianity, wrote, in analyzing why the early church was growing, he simply said, see how these Christians love one another. See how they love one another. This winter when Gene and I were in Turkey, we went to Cappadocia, which, you know, is where they have the caves. The Christians carved out within these caves, they carved out sanctuaries, beautiful icons and paintings on the walls. And what's fascinating is when you see how they lived that life, they lived in these caves and then they worshipped in these particular caves, but you worshipped in this cave and then you ducked and went into the next cave, and here carved out a stone in the middle of this room is a table. And on the other room, another entryway in another room on the other side was the kitchen, because after worship, they all gathered for the agape meal, the love feast. They gathered as family to express their compassion and their care for one another. You see, they lived it out. As Tertullian said, see how these Christians express love for one another. Later on, Julian the Apostate, he was named that because as emperor of Rome, after Constantine had converted and made Christianity the legal religion of the Roman Empire, he tried to take them back to paganism, and he couldn't do it. He was having trouble with it, and the reason he was these Christians would care for all the disenfranchised of the Roman Empire. And he said, see how these Galileans, these impious Christians, care not only for their poor, but ours as well. You know, we often think that Christianity just spread miraculously, but if you read historic pieces, you see that when the well-to-do in Rome fled, when the plagues hit, or when war came, it was the Christians who often stayed and nurtured and cared for those people who had no family, who were sick, dying, and left behind. You see, those early Christians in that early church grew because they became known for their terms of service, which really were terms of interminable service, extravagant service, that they performed through acts of love that were based on their own personal sacrifice and grace. Last week we witnessed, and you know, we are somewhat getting our feet on the ground again, we witnessed the horror and heartbreak that occurred in the city of Boston. But as the week moved on and the photographs way in which the first responders went in, and not just them, but those citizens who were around that situation, who instead of running from, actually ran toward. the epicenter to try to help and to carry and to care for individuals who were hurt. All of which kind of concluded, reached a climax with the story of one particular individual. You may recall his name, David Henneberry. You know, David Henneberry was the individual who owned the house that had the boat. Remember, and he was interviewed on ABC, and they said, we would like to introduce you to our hero, David Henneberry, and he said, I really don't like that. You could call me an incidental hero. I thought that was a very interesting way of putting it. But when you look at his story, the fascinating part is not merely that he called the police, but, you know, leading up to that, he saw the blood. He saw the torn on his tarp. He put a ladder against the boat, as I understand it, and lifted up the tarp to actually look inside it. Now, that takes a lot of courage. That part takes a ton of courage. And it brought to mind the advertising that the Board of Homeland Security has done, the campaign they've run in New York City, where the posters for Homeland Security say, see something, say something. That's what they say throughout the subways and everywhere. See something, say something. But David Henneberry reminds us that there's one more step involved in that. It's not see something, say something. It's also do something. Let's put some theology under that. It's not enough to see Jesus or to hear about Jesus or to talk about Jesus. What Jesus reminds us of is that we are to do Jesus. We are to see, say, and do. To respond. It's not enough to see Jesus, to listen to someone say or preach about Him. We are called to do something about Him, performing sometimes acts that are unthinkable to other people, unprofitable by the world's standards, daring, risky. We are asked to do something about Jesus, to act not merely on, but to act out. To act out what He lived, and that we far too easily preach. You know, it's much easier for me to stand up here and talk about it than it is for any of us to go out there and to do it. Love one another. Which leads me, as Steve Jobs used to say in his presentations, to just one more thing. One more thing. How many of you actually read the title and wondered what this was about? Yeah. Anybody here heard or said or shared the phrase, scared the bejesus out of me? Anybody know where that came from or what that means? My understanding is it came from the 18th century England, when it was you could legally be in prison, arrested for blasphemy. Saying, my God, I'm going to do that. My Jesus, I'm going to do that. So the way they got around that was the word bejesus, which eventually evolved into bejesus. You know, we're always looking for ways around rules, aren't we? So when someone said it scared the bejesus out of me, what it really meant was it got them out of their oath. They had sworn something by Jesus, and it scared the bejesus out of me means I can't fulfill it. I'm out of it. It's done. Which is really very theological in one way. It's quite profound because it reminds us that the world would scare who and what out of us? Jesus. That the world would try to frighten that and scare us and push us into a place where we do not act upon what we say we believe. And yet the calling is to be Jesus. To be Jesus. You see, that summarizes the whole terms of service agreement. That's easy to check, but hard to follow through. To be Jesus. It is the reason you come here, or should be the reason you come here, is to check that box again for another week. Those are the terms of agreement. And we leave here pondering the question, are we doing that, or are we putting Him and our calling on hold for 1,900 more minutes? More concerned about how Jesus might serve us, or what others can do for us, rather than what we are called to do for Him and them. For lest we forget, we are called to lives of service based not on what we can get, but what we can give, not with caveat after caveat, limiting our risk and our accountability, but accepting it. For we are called to see something, say something, do something, be something. We are called to be Jesus. Amen. And we will continue our worship